Hello from the work desk. It's time for a Hagaki-Yoi, a special viewer mail segment where I answer questions from you, the people, the best I can. We're going to start with a couple questions I have gotten for on the Hagaki-Yoi, but they keep coming back up, so we may as well talk about them. First, what is your favorite kimari-te? My favorite kimari-te are the nages, or the throws. I like kimari-te that are like three-dimensional, involve a bit of tossing. Yorikiri Oshidashi, totally fine, but a bit two-dimensional, a little bit boring. I like the throws. How did you get into sumo? Okay, I've been asked this one many, many times, and I have answered this one both on the show and on other people's shows. So I'm going to link to a Grand Sumo Breakdown episode I did where I talk about it in great, great detail. So if you want to check that out, the TLDR is I got kind of fed up with American football and still had a hole in my heart for large men hitting each other in a sport. So there you go. Next up from viewer First Mate Rayleigh 500. What does a rikishi must have that makes you a fan of him? Now, I like to think I'm a fan of most rikishi, unless they have proven themselves to be somehow like a jerk or evil in real life. But what makes me like especially like a wrestler would probably be, are they fun to watch? Do they have a fun story, like outside the ring, like something to grab onto, like, do it for your coach who's sick, something like that. That's fun. Do they seem sort of cool as a human? Like, would I ever want to hang out with this person in real life? Or are they just so ridiculously intense? It'd be like, have fun, buddy. Do your sumo stuff. And it certainly helps if the wrestler could plausibly be in contention to win a U show at some point. It's always more fun to be able to cheer for someone who might actually win the whole thing. So that being said, my current favorites are Taka Keisho. We know not quite doing as well as he used to, but Taka Keisho, Uda, and back in the day, Tochi Notion. Tango Government 5650 asks, how important is a nice high shiko in determining your favorite sumo wrestlers? Well, since I just said like one of my favorites is Taka Keisho, not that much. That isn't to say that aesthetically I do not love a nice high shiko. I think Abe's is the best, and yeah, I do like Abe. Disco Golf Doug 6193 asks, what is the hardest Japanese word for you to pronounce? It's probably a Japanese word that I do not know what it is. I'm very bad at Japanese. I have gotten better. If you want to check back to some of the early episodes, I have done my best to get better, but I am not good at Japanese. So the hardest word for me, I guess, the hardest thing for me in Japanese isn't a word. It is just a specific letter, and it's the letter R. I mean, I come from California, so like all my Spanish language stuff was like Spanish. So it's like I'm used to the Español, the R's. We must dig into them. And I spent a lot of time in the Midwest in my adult life, and R's are very important there, So when we get to Japanese, it was a little difficult for me to sort of get that like perfect mix of a light D and a light L that goes for an R. And we don't say Kirishima, and we don't say Hoshoryu. It's like Kirishima, Hoshoryu. But when you put that R sound at the beginning of a word, like Ryuden, I can't quite get there. So it's like Ryuden. So yeah, a first R sound in a Japanese word is hard for me. Brandon Winstead 7137 asks, what is your favorite character from the stage, cinema, anime, and why? Clearly, I'm very biased, but the character of Dewey Finn from School of Rock has absolutely changed my life with the opportunity to be able to play that character on stage. So I guess stage character would be that, but that also counts as a cinema character. So I'll pick another one that's also both stage and cinema. One of my favorite movies is the movie Amadeus from the 80s, and I always loved the character of Antonio Salieri, who's sort of the lead in the movie Amadeus. I always found something fascinating about a character whose personal hell was being able to appreciate great art but never create it himself. I wonder why maybe I somehow sympathetic to that. And as for anime, that's an easy one. From Neon Genesis Evangelion, Misato and her penguin friend Pen. I love the idea of Misato. For those of you who don't know, Misato works at like this government agency called NERV that is in charge of like keeping the entire world safe from giant aliens. So at work, she's a total badass. She's totally great at her job. But the second she gets home, she is a hot mess, a functional alcoholic. And did I mention the penguin she owns, who is also a functional alcoholic? So the dichotomy of that character is incredibly watchable. I love Misato-san. Viewer Hob Bob Gob 3236 asks, Do you have any lower division favorites, Juryo and or Makushita Rikishi, who haven't been in Makuuchi yet? I've been very forward about my love for Onokatsu. He should be up in Makuuchi next tournament. Down in Makushita, I really like the new guy from Isagahama, Sato Rufuji. He's good. He's only 20. He seems to have already sort of grown into like a full big sumo body. He's a big boy. Our current defending Makushita champ, let me make sure I get this right, Dai Seizan. He's only 24 and has already come back from an injury. He seems very strong after this injury, and I would expect him to be charging up through the Juryo ranks fairly soon. And a couple of guys in Makushita, one Waka Ikari and the other one Otsuji. They're younger guys, and I'm just waiting for them to fill into their bodies a little bit, put a little more weight on, and then I think they're going to make a push. Otsuji is only 20, and he's managed to grow a little bit. He's finally broken 300 pounds, so I could see him making some movement in the next few tournaments. Waka Ikari is only 5'9", 242 pounds right now, so I think we're going to need to wait a little bit on Waka Ikari. Longtime viewer Joanna Edwards, 6325, asks a whole bunch of very personal questions, and I will answer a few of them. Am I single, married, connected to anyone? Besides acting, singing, and sumo, what do you like to do for fun, and what city is your home? I think I can answer all those in one sort of giant answer. Well, one of the major things I do when I'm not talking about sumo here, I am a musician, a performer, and a singer-songwriter, and I'm currently working on a folk musical called Sarah and the Seed. Check it out at www.sarahandtheseed.com. And I'm working on this with my writing partner, who also happens to be my life partner, Juliet Maserschmidt. We actually became writing partners before we started becoming life partners, and that was a sort of interesting journey in itself. But we will have been together now, we are almost up at 10 years. Thanks for asking. We live here in New York City, the concrete jungle where dreams are made of. And yeah, please, if any of y'all Dohyo heads are up in New York, hit me up. I got recommendations, and if I'm free, let's totally meet up. Viewer Ricky Marcel Pitcher 8584 asks, how many different cup winners will we see between now and the end of 2025? I.e., will a new top dog rise, or are we going to see 6+ different winners in the next 9 tournaments? If my math is right, between now and the end of 2025 is 8 tournaments, but I would guess that we are going to see 5 different wrestlers win those 8 tournaments. And if I had to guess, they would be Onosato, Kotazakura, Hoshodyu. I'll say Atami Fuji. I'm going to put that out there. I think Atami Fuji is going to win his first championship in the next 8, and then there'd be one wild card, so that could be just a weird Maegashira one. That could be Terunofuji sticking around for 11. That'd be cool. But yeah, if I had to put a number, I'd say 5. And in a related question, viewer Ishmael Reed asks, do you think we will see a Zensho Yusho before the end of 2025? No, I don't. I don't think we have anyone right now who is dominant enough to get to 15. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. But yeah, generally the bar used to be between 13 and 14 wins. Now it seems to be between 12 and 13 wins for a standard Yusho. So 15 just seems to be a bit much for anyone we have wrestling right now. Viewer Jacob Gottwald 1847 asks a very tough question. Can you make a tier list of wrestlers from the view of their primes? This could be just current wrestlers or retired. It can also include people who are in other divisions. I like this idea because usually the downfall of wrestlers is injuries that they never recover from. The simple answer is no. No, I can't. First of all, I have not been able to come up with a way, just judging on the very few stats Sumo puts out there. It's not like baseball, where we have a whole bunch of advanced stats we can dig through to get a larger picture. The only stats we really have in Sumo are, did you win or lose, and what was the technique used to achieve that win? That's sort of it. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to have any way of knowing if Futabayama could beat Raiden, and if Raiden could beat Tanikaze, and Tanikaze could beat Hakuho. There's just no way to do a direct comparison like that. That would make sense and be correct. I mean, I could just write a list of like all the Yokozuna and put them in order, but I have no way of knowing. And I very much agree that the downfall of most sumo wrestlers is, in fact, their injury history, but I don't think you can take injury out of it. Injury is so much of just the life of a sumo wrestler. I don't think anyone who wrestles for more than a year is not dealing with some form of physical injury. So it has to be part of the story. It's like we can't just ask, would Terunofuji be better than Hakuho if his knees were better? They're not. That's part of the package. And that leads us to our final question, and yeah, it's another doozy. JS3217 asks, JWags, I may be seeing things or even biased in some way, but from watching videos of old sumo matches from the 90s onward to today, it seems that Rikishi in past years flat out fought better and tried harder to win than the current crop. Watch some of these videos with Chiyonofuji, Akebono, Hakuho, Asashoryu, Harumafuji, et al. Those were some barn burner matches. Today's matches seem somewhat tame by comparison. What's your take on this? All right, so this is an excellent question, but it's also sort of a large question that requires a beefy answer. As I just mentioned, it is really, really hard to judge talent level across eras. And there are a few reasons why matches from the past might automatically seem better and more interesting than matches we see today. Number one, I like to call the Petula Clark effect. When I was growing up, my dad was into classic rock, and he got me into classic rock, and we listened to the classic rock station. And growing up, I'm like, oh man, the 60s and 70s were so great. Every single song that got released in the 60s and 70s was a banger. Well, no, it's just I didn't live in the 60s and only very, very little bit of the 70s. So I didn't get to hear the multitude of crap that was also released on the radio alongside these stone cold classics. But now, 40, 50 years later, what are we doing? We're only listening to the stone cold classics, and we're not listening to the Petula Clarks of the past. And I'm not casting shade on Petula Clark. Wonderful singer. Who doesn't love Downtown? But it's not the thing you necessarily hear on the classic radio of the 60s. So I don't know how many people are like going back and watching like full days of a tournament from like 1992. And we were probably just going back and watching the best matches, and we already know they're the best matches because they've already happened. That brings us to the next effect, the epilogue effect. When we look into the past, we know exactly why each match was important and what happened to those wrestlers through the end of their career. So when we watch these matches from the past, like these Chiyonofuji, like these Akebono matches, even the Harumafuji Hakuho matches, we know how that story ends. We know what context that match was in and what the result of that match does for each of these wrestlers' legacy. Today, when we're watching them, we can't know what each individual match, how important that's going to be. We can barely even tell day to day how important it's going to be in that basho. So when we don't know the ending point, it's harder for us to see that certain matches are more important. And the other effect I want to talk about, which makes it really hard to go from between eras, to talk about baseball again, there was a pitcher named Walter Johnson. He was considered the fastest pitcher in baseball back at like the beginning of the 1900s. Famous, fastest fastball in baseball. And Walter Johnson pitched until about 1927. Well, about 10 years later, this kid comes up named Bob Feller, and everyone starts saying he's got the best fastball in baseball. Now, this was in the days before radar guns, so they couldn't just measure the speed of the pitch. So they ended up asking people who had faced both of them. And they usually said, Bob Feller is throwing way faster than Walter Johnson. But if we look at when those players played, they were playing the beginning of their career facing Walter Johnson, who was at the very end of his career when he was 38 or 39. These players, 10 years later, are now facing Bob Feller, who was 17 or 18 when he started his career, and seeing that young man's fastball versus the fastball of someone who had already pitched for 20 years. So even though those people had faced both pitchers, they had not faced the same fastballs. So I could mathematically create a chain from Taiho to Hakuho and figure out, well, if Taiho beat this person this many times, and then this person beat this person this many times, and move it all the way up through the generations, I could probably come up with some sort of mathematical proof that said, well, if this person could beat Taiho, then this person could also have beaten Hakuho many years later. There's way too many variables for us to figure it out like that. The Walter Johnson effect. Okay, and after saying all of that, I have to agree with you. I do think the overall level of sumo is not as good as it was in the 90s. In fact, I don't think it's as good as it was even 8 or 9 years ago when I started watching sumo. I know I mentioned there aren't that many stats in sumo, but there are a few indicators that show, I think, the relative strength of a bansuke. Number one, are there a lot of yokozuna on the bansuke, and are they winning yusho? Right now, no and no. Right now, we have one yokozuna who shows up every third basho, and usually wins, but that's not that much. And attached to that, are there a lot of Maegashira yusho happening at any given period of time? And you'll have to say that in the past few years, we have had a lot of Maegashira yusho. And yes, I have stats. So if you look at modern sumo, 1958 until now, let me get the stats out. In all that time, the 398 yusho from 1958 until now, we had 26 Maegashira yusho in all of that time. That's 6.5%. And we had 252 yokozuna yusho. That's 63.3% in modern sumo. Now, since the beginning of 2018, which was the very first year Hakuho went Kyujo in 3 out of 6 tournaments, and his attendance record did not get better after that. So, from 2018 till now, we've had 39 Basho. And we've had 9 Maegashira Yusho in there. That's 23%. And the number of Yokozuna Yusho, 14 out of 39, which is only 35.8%. So once again, our Maegashira Yusho ratio has gone from 6% to 23%, and our Yokozuna have gone from roughly 2/3 to roughly 1/3 of the time. We can also look and see that we don't have that many 14 and 15 win Yusho anymore. Most of them are 12 and 13. And yes, I have the stats in pie chart form. Now, if we look at this pie chart, we've had 398 Basho since the beginning of 1958. And as you'll see, more than half of them are 13 or 14 win Yusho. And then if we look at this pie chart, which goes from 2018 till now, we will see that more than half are 13 and 12 win Yusho. The math is there. We're winning fewer matches to win Yusho. Now, of course, this could mean that the top level of sumo is so much better than it used to be that we just don't have anyone who is dominant in this group. After all, wins measure relative dominance to the people you are facing. But I don't think this group is significantly better than the group we've just had. And I think this is recent enough where we don't have to deal with the Walter Johnson effect. 2 years ago, Hakuho finished out his career with a Zensho against Terunofuji. This past Basho, Terunofuji came back, and I'm guessing Terunofuji's not better now, healthier than he was 2 years ago. He came back and won his sort of like comeback Yokozuna tournament, but he didn't get a Zensho. He only got 12 and 3. Against the Banzuke, that was weaker because it didn't have Hakuho in it. And you'd expect it to be stronger at this point than it was 2 years ago, because now we ostensibly have wrestlers like Takakeisho, Kirishima, Hoshodyu, Onosato. All these guys supposed to be Kotozakura, all in their peak, as opposed to a few years ago when they were still coming up through the ranks. So yes, judging from that, I would say that, yeah, sumo is in a bit of a lull right now, but that doesn't mean that it can't come back. What will it take for sumo to get back to its last level? We talked about this in another episode, about why young Japanese men may or may not be wanting to join sumo in the modern era. But let me know what you think. Why do you think sumo might be weaker than it was a few years ago? I got my thoughts, but I'd love to hear your take. Thank you for joining us for this Hagaki-Yoi. Please stay tuned to the channel. Not only do I have this new Yokozuna episode coming up that you're not going to want to miss, where we talk about outlier Yokozuna runs, but also we are heading up to the September Basho. The Banzuke is supposed to drop today. Very excited about that. You're not going to want to miss any of this coverage. So everyone, stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, and I will see you next time on the Dohyo.